recording. Welcome back, everyone who is joining the video or listening or reading, because this podcast is on all the places. It's on Substack where you can read it. It's on Spotify and all the audio platforms where you're listening, or YouTube and Substack that has video. So just welcome to all the people that have been joining us. This is our episode after our anniversary. I was telling Sarah I'm not going to count the episodes because I don't know actually the number sequence that we're on, but I know that this is after our anniversary one. So it's just so exciting to keep being in this journey. It's been a year since she and I have connected and found each other and developed a friendship. In Spanish, there's this word called comadre, which is like this bond between women who are like matriarchs. And so I feel that way with Sarah, that we bond, we support each other. I'm gonna introduce this episode. We're gonna get into edges, so maybe you see me a little edgy on some I don't know, different energies, good energies, but like feisty. So the introduction. This is the Capacity Conversations podcast, where two women from each coast of the United States have challenging dialogue about self-trust, transformation, and the reality most modern millennials are facing today. Do we actually have the capacity to do all the things we want to do? That's the overarching question we ask ourselves in each episode in this series. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Raquel Sands. I'm a clarity and work strategist. I also make small batch cacao. We'll get into that. Or maybe I've said it in a previous episode. And I help people create and sustain their peace, purpose, and prosperity on their terms. And I will pass it over to my lovely co-host to introduce herself.
I love you say feeling like edgy type of energy. I also feel like I'm bringing that to this conversation, and even as we were landing, being reminded of like going over our notes, like, oh man, we are so good with planning. I feel like our topic and then living it out in real time. And so I'm here with the edgy energy today. I love that as well, because I am a rewilding real estate agent. That's my brand, Rewilding Real Estate. I'm a real estate broker here in Washington State, licensed across the state, but I live in Spokane Valley, and work with buyers and sellers in residential real estate, which I'm doing right now. But I also have an interest in intentional community and how we form a connection with each other and ourselves and nature as a living, breathing entity that we dwell on and with and in and among. And here to ask the question about that relationship and where those edges between us and nature. I think that's one edge that I really live in daily, and real estate is kind of my way of doing that.
Yes. I mean, we've shared in, I think, the previous episode about our work journeys and how we pivoted. So if you're joining us, please feel free to, go back to our other episodes so that the things that we say don't sound random. I mean, they might be, who knows, but it's like we've had our journeys, and there's a reason why, and there's edges that we've been pushing consciously or unconsciously, I think, inside of us. And I just love our journey and our symmetry, but also the parallels between Sarah and I, because we've both been, I think, very intentional of discovering our edges and why we even want to talk about edges today.
Yeah.
So we keep talking about edges.
Words. I feel like by the end of the episode, we're going to be like, what is an edge? It's just like spelled funny. You know how when you look at a word for too long? But that's really what we do. I feel like it's really dwell on this themes of our lives, and question it, because as it relates to our capacity to show up. And I feel like pushing our edges is how we expand our capacity. So that's 100%.
So I guess to introduce why we're talking about edges, because each episode we've planned them a year ago, and then as the year has unfolded, we also kind of have pivoted and morphed and adapted the themes. But this one came up really organically. I was catching up with Sarah, and the term came up on its own about, like, we are both millennials. This series is really not just for millennials, but a lot of the themes we think are really pertinent for millennials, those of us who are in our 30s to mid 40s, and the society that we're all living, surviving, trying to thrive and grapple with in all different ways. And so one of the things that came up is like, I felt like there was this standing at a cliff. I love when Sarah talks about like being on the cliff's end and like this feeling of being at the edge, like at a limit. And so I think the big thing that I've been sitting with is like edges are very scary, but to Sarah's point, they're very necessary because, like any muscle, if we're not pushing it, pulling it, if we're not, whether we know it or not, it's not like you have to go to the gym and you're actively pushing and prodding yourself. But even thinking about going to the gym is an edge, and even like thinking or feeling, and all of these are edges. And so I like etymology, so I just wanted to start with that. The word edge comes from the Old English noun meaning both cutting side of a blade and point. So I'm going to stop there because I feel like that in and of itself, understanding the root of an idea or the root of something, like how did something become and how did we start to define and give meaning to something, is already interesting. Like what does it even mean to have an edge? And so it being a point, like a point of something, as in there's like a limit to it or like a natural conclusion to something, or it's the cutting side. So it's something as like a tool or a defense, potentially defense mechanism thing, something that can sever. And so it's interesting now that I'm just kind of sitting with it and filtering that it's both like a noun and a verb is what I'm getting the sense of. It's like the tool that creates change, that can create, and also it is the change. So it's interesting to sit with this, I think, because now we are recording this in May 2026 and there's been so much political upheaval and just a lot of things always potentially going on in society. But I also think that us millennials grappling with external stuff and the internal stuff at the same time, and I don't think that it has been at this level. Like I think other generations have had the privilege, the honor of not having technology always in their face, and there was a different sense of stability, and so certain edges were had already been pushed or didn't need to be pushed, or all of these other things. And yet for our generation it seems like we've never been able, there's always edges every time. It's like we get to one edge and nope, psych, punk, there's another edge. And with grappling with that while simultaneously figuring out ourselves and our own internal edges in relationship to the external. I was telling Sarah before we hopped on the call that I had another commitment today with another collaborator, and in me, as I was grappling with what I was going to do to honor that other recording or not, I felt this guilt. And I didn't mention this to you because we hopped on the call, but I felt this guilt of, how much space capacity do I have a right to honor if I want to be in right relationship or like be reciprocal in some way to this other person. But then I started to, I don't know, just sit with that. I mean, I was walking my dogs, so being in nature and just being away from the computer and all of that, creating that capacity, that space was super helpful. But I just realized that, well, I have to be able to honor where I am right now. And so that was the edge. Obviously, there was a limit being pushed for whatever reason. It wasn't coming from me today. And I think that's a big part that we grapple with in terms of capacity, is like, how are we able to define the amount of capacity we have in any given moment with any given person? And then what are we willing and able to, like, how are we willing and able to work with whatever comes up, which could be an edge, a limit, a boundary within that? And it
Yeah.
feels, that seems like a lot, and it is. And in like a split second, it's incredible what we ask of ourselves every day. And we don't even realize how much we're asking ourselves, for good or bad, like not judging, but just we're doing a lot. We're
Yeah,
doing a
and
lot.
just being aware of it, I think
Yeah.
that's why I feel like it all comes back to in any practice or not, well, in a lot of practices or traditions or mindsets of just being aware of what's happening within you and how you're meeting your environment, and even acknowledging that information, I feel like isn't a given.
Yeah.
And so the people that do feel like they can act on the information that like I'm uncomfortable, or oh, I feel confident, or I feel like I should leave the situation, or oh, I feel like I should speak up. Any of these responses that we could have to the situation, and having the freedom to act on it, to actually act on it and follow through, to feel safe enough or boundary enough or confident enough and trustful of yourself enough in the situation and that the people that you're working with. Yeah, describing it, it's like a very luxurious thing, it sounds like, but it's also one that doesn't feel that hard to achieve. If you know what you want, you could potentially get what you want. And knowing what we want even to work in. And gosh, there was something that you said earlier about regulation. Wait, can you can you read the other definition of edge again?
First is the cutting side of a blade,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one is point. So like just the point of something, like the tip, I would say, of a knife or something like that.
And so when we say, like, I feel like coming to an edge, that's just part of our language. We don't necessarily use it by those definitions, right? Like the edge within, or like, oh, this is an edge for this developing individual to try this new thing.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily use it to that proper definition. And so to say that we're meeting an edge emotionally kind of brings a new definition to the word.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, but also since we get words from these kind of objects in our environment, it's almost like we use it to describe the point in our lives that like different parts of us do collide.
Right.
It's like that's where I feel like, okay, going back to work and being
Yeah.
able to have this, that's what we have in common, is this ability to question our reality and say, no, I'm going to place myself in a different environment over and over and over and over and over until I am in a place where I can root, shoot, and sprout and bloom, because my talents are being accepted and they can grow. Finding a place we can actually grow and tuning into what we need to grow, I feel like, is what meeting an edge is like in our work. And so for me, I guess what I'm getting to is like my world of being an herbalist, it oftentimes feels like it collides with my world of being a real estate agent. It's almost like some of the values and intrinsic patterns of both systems and practices and industries and traditions sometimes oppose each other. And so that's an edge I feel like I walk in mentally or even emotionally sometimes. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, yeah, because I feel like work is the more tangible. Because I was also gonna say like, oh, in relationships, we're grappling with how vulnerable do we want to be with somebody, and that could be an edge. But I feel like with work, it gets even more like rooted, grounded, because it's tied to money. So it's like, what am I willing and able to do that may or may not conflict with an internal edge, with like an internal limit, for the sake of having a roof over my head. And I think that even I was watching an Instagram reel like a couple minutes ago, an hour ago, and it said that, and I don't know that this is for real, because I mean, I don't know, I haven't researched and sourced it, but apparently it said that by in July of this year, in 2026, certain professions will no longer be professional, quote unquote, and some of the ones that were listed were physical therapists, occupational therapists. And so the commentary on this video was just this kind of the audacity of the government or department or whoever to just in a moment be able to say this career, this job is no longer professional. And the meaning of that could mean different things for the type of training, the type of regulation and rigor, the type of employment. And so that came to mind for me as we talk about work and edges, because I know for me, like I never knew what I wanted. I knew I needed to be employed because I had debt, but I never defined myself with the title. But I do really honor that the fact that I got in debt for this degree, an English degree, allowed so many doors to open and to be plotted in different environments and transplant myself,
Yeah.
which has been very useful,
Yeah.
testing my edges, understanding. But I feel like that's not, it's becoming harder, I think, potentially for people to be able to do that, to test their edges, because there's no like how do people have the time and energy and money to be able to figure out the environment that's best going to be able to support their edges and safely like push their edges and whatever. Like that's all that we're doing all at the same time, that we're having to make this transactional commitment of well, I just need to do this, regardless of whether I can learn about myself or whether I can know myself, because I have to get paid. And I told Sarah I was feeling very, and a couple of my other friends, I was feeling very just disheartened, because that was so much of my work, is repurposing the corporate ladder and helping people become sovereign, self-sovereign, regardless of whatever corporate structure. But when we don't have the space to, like, everything needs a container. The earth isn't just floating water. Like, it has a container that contains the water and the earth and the land and the people. So if we don't have a container to be able to then expound and explore and whatever it is, then it's kind of like, well, what is an edge? Then there's no edge. Then there's no kind of, I don't know, like, form of defining ourselves or pushing ourselves, because it's just all nebulous. So I just say that because it's something that concerns me for us millennials, but then also the newer generations having to define. We have to define our own edges, I guess, while the edges are being defined for us. I don't know. It feels very,
We are in a transition age. Like there's, oh, I feel like there's so many like words that have been put to it, like the great turning or the wheel, the wheel of time too, because talking about the patterns of ages, also centuries and generations. And I saw, talk about being inspired by things on the internet, seeing statistic about the regulation, like talking the forced like self-regulation of our generation versus kids of the 60s and 70s.
okay.
And that somehow like mentally that's why they became a strong generation, is because they were forced to self-regulate so much because they didn't have a lot of emotional guidance from their parents who were World War II parents and kids in World War II. Like that's, I mean, holy hell. And so there's these generational abilities to meet or not meet
Right. Yeah.
your environment emotionally or not emotionally, and then like your lens on it and how we view danger and safety and good investments. It's interesting you mention like federally what suddenly policy can take away
Right.
on an industrial level, and then that unfolds into communities across our nation,
Right.
and we live out our lives in communities that have these models. I mean, like going from coast to coast, driving all across the country, it's weird how real estate developments have these very similar patterns and money comes from very similar places. And so how we see our environment is very much how we are meeting the edge of our reality. I just feel like I'm, it's kind of sound like I'm oversimplifying it, but this is,
No.
that's why this is the theme, I feel like, in our conversation and our friendship, because it's like, oh my gosh, we could be anything. And that's like the crazy like childhood passion that I feel like when we in nature connection that we talk about childhood passions as being a pathway for adults to remember, and not just parts of your inner self, but like actually what it was like to connect to your environment in a free or hopefully more free way than you do as an adult. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's the silly thing that I feel like I just latch onto as an adult in my world today. And something I choose to believe in is that wow, we really could build anything and live in it. And like
Yes.
we need to have a discussion on what that looks like, because
Yes.
we are about to put people on the moon and like make a home there. And so what we do in order to meet our human need to survive, which I think is also interesting that this whole other definition of edge is like a cutting tool and like one of the C's of survival, one of the main C's of survival, the 4 or 5 C's, whatever model you think of with the main things humans need to survive. One of them is one of the C's is a cutting edge,
Yes.
something, an edge to create a cutting tool, because
Yeah.
we need, as humans, it's a tool that we have both
Mm.
physically and mentally to grow. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm just sitting with all of that. I'm just sitting with all of that. I was like, yes, keep going.
we're talking anything, we have to grow towards it. We
Yes.
can't sit back and think, oh, I'm gonna be a multi-million dollar real estate agent. You know, I've been like, now that my business is growing a little bit right now, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm back in sales. And I like listening to coaches talking who have a multi-million dollar business. I'm like, I don't really see that for myself. But thinking
Mm,
about it, the reality of running a solid business means a
mm,
multi-million dollar real estate business. And I'm like, that actually seems achievable, but I have to
mm,
grow towards it. I can't,
mm.
like, I've had such limiting mindsets in the past that it's like, okay, that's not a sustainable pathway. So I'm meeting so many edges right now, literally in my life too, that are about yeah, growing through that pain, you know?
Yeah, I mean, what's coming up for me is so that commitment that I didn't honor, or I it just wasn't in me this morning. As I like to do a voice chat with AI or Google, I don't know, whichever thing. And I like it because first, and I've sat with this. I've sat with my edges. I used to really write a lot when I was younger because it was really, I'm an only child, and so it felt like the only container was a journal that I could dump everything into. Now it's been 20 years since that, and I realize that I get so caught up in the words, in the language of what I'm trying to express about the certain edges that it just doesn't come out. And so I use AI and whatever, Google Record just to get it out of me first. And I say this because as I made that decision to tell my friend, my collaborator, like, I'm sorry, not today. I'm at my limit. The answer is no. That took time to get to that. But as I was doing that, a lot that came up for me was about myself, like self, this sense of self, and what does it mean to have ownership? Like, who am I? And what am I trying to own? And as I was just decompressing, and I want to make some Substack, some essays from it. So there's that. But a lot what came up for me was this sense of like, if I don't know who I am, or if I'm not in tune with a sense of groundedness, of Raquelness that's different from all the other million billion Raquels that exist in this world, then how am I knowing what my edges are? Like, then how do I know what my limits are and my boundaries? And it's because there's no, like, reverse engineering. If I don't know that this is a tree and this tree has certain needs that are different than potentially another tree that looks similarly, but each tree is its own thing, then it's like, how am I honoring that tree as its own being? And when I started to realize all of that, in just saying no today to a podcast recording. So we're talking about like a very in like small moment that in my life that helped me realize, like, you know what? I'm really happy that this happened because it was really uncomfortable to say no and to sit with all these thoughts, and it's very uncomfortable to do I feel guilt? Do I feel shame? Am I being selfish? Am I not, blah, 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 blah. But it's like, fuck it. Like, I need time. I need energy. I'm just one person. And even if we don't find the words, the way in which to describe, just in honoring the feeling along the edge that, like, okay, there's a point being made here, honor that. Now, what are we going to do with that change or that whatever it is? And I don't know, I felt very called to say that because in all of this change and transition happening inside us and around us, I think the thing that I keep taking away is like this sense of self, like regardless of what we're doing, being self-aware, self-developing, self-exploration, like there's always self. So there's always ourselves that we come back to in 10 years, in 50 years, and there's always those roots that we're tending to, regardless of people cutting our branches off or new branches and new sprouts and new whatever. Like, there's always this sense of self, of rootedness. And I loved what Sarah was saying, what you were saying about the people in the 60s and 70s, because old containers need to, like, there's a cleansing is what I'm sensing, or like there's a chapter closing, there's a edge being met maybe in society, and we are cutting things now and we don't know how things are shaping up, but now it's both scary and empowering that we all get to shape something somehow. I will say the one thing that I do worry about, and I was watching a Diary of a CEO episode and it came up about this, the technology keeps us so in, potentially keeps us in our own bubbles, to the potentially, I keep quotations, allegedly. And so it's just, it could be concerning that, like, if I want to explain something to my neighbor, and because they are in a totally different reality bubble, what they're consuming and what they are digesting and everything, then it's like we're not even in the same reality. So the things that we're constructing, we don't even realize how these things collide and how these edges are being made. So that's something I do think about with our generation who are going to be the adults in the room. I think, in the future. And it's kind of like, well, we can really set in, I don't know, an awakening, a new kind of precedent, I think, hopefully. And just keeping in mind that like my reality isn't anybody else's reality, but it also is. Like we share a societal reality, but we also share an individual. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just gonna stop there because I feel like that
Oh
was a
my.
lot.
Well, I'm thinking of so many things, and I feel like my thought is somewhat formed, but I'll start with this. You said something earlier that made me think, like, this is why, like, the seconds matter, because you can decide in that moment if denying yourself, however, is the right thing to do or not. I feel like that's
Mm-hmm.
one of the calls of parenthood I have been really thinking on for the past few years. Like, okay, there is, like, it doesn't matter if you're tired. You have to get up and tend to the baby. Like, that's how it works. Like, that's what makes you a good parent. You have to self-sacrifice in service to your next generation, like your child. That's the task. And so the freedom or sovereignty to decide, okay, I can or can't deny myself, and that is a good or not good thing, and I can make the right choice and feel good about that and find balance in my life overall or elsewhere or along my journey or in this chapter. And that's why the seconds matter, and that's also why the seasons matter. It's like, okay, maybe this is just for a season. And I mean, that's talking about the trees and seeing, I keep like looking over, I'm like, that's a finch. Or like, I don't see the finches all the time. And so there's these new birds that I feel like I'm with my people like you, where I'm allowed to like notice the birds. That's not something that, like everyone in meeting our edges, talking about edges, like I just talk about birds with people now. I feel like that's an edge I had to meet with myself about, like, well, am I just going to be the weird nature girl who like brings in berries and shows people wild plants and like, what are you drinking? This weird tea. And I was I don't carry around mason jars so much anymore, but I used to, because I was making all sorts of interesting new teas in mason jars, and I would just chill the jar and take it with me. And I feel like that was an edge of meeting, like, no, I'm truly trying to live with these plants, and this is a lifestyle, and this is the way I'm practicing it right now. I have to be willing to be seen doing that. And that's, oh my gosh, hearing myself say that, even I'm like, ah, because there's still so much that I fear being seen in a lot of ways. And that's, yeah, another edge that I feel like I'm living in. And then something else, the individual, we do share, and that's why, yeah, and that's why that's why our relationship to each other and those seconds with each other do matter. And we have to be a part of each other's lives because we're around each other. Like, that information that I'm taking in to decide who I am and what choice I'm going to make in my life is because you're a part of it. Like, that is to deny so much about our or your presence in the world. To say, that's been a huge learning for me, and a huge edge for me is acknowledging that we take up space as people. We ripple out through others' lives. And so being very intentional with, I suppose, what I do and what I'm known for, which sometimes is reflected back to me. I've had reflected back to me with the job stuff, Raquel. I met this friend from college. She was in town, and we just saw her for one night. She came by. We were working on the house, and she's from Alaska. Dear sweet friend from Alaska. You know who you are. I love you. Yes. And she said something about like me having like 15 jobs in college, and that was over 10 years ago. And so it's like, wow, that's funny. That's right. I have always like juggled different jobs, like, because I have odd jobs, and like that's something I guess I've been known for. And now as a real estate agent, like, this pattern in me to like network and build things and organize and community, and there's these themes in my life that once I realized I've leaned into that edge enough and I've tapped into it, like, I don't know. It's going back to like choosing your profession and pushing on an edge until it becomes familiar, because that's who I want to be.
Yes, yes. And then I'm even wondering, like, with that, I even wonder if it even is an edge, if it's like something like that, like it wants to be known. I think I told you we're watching Vikings Valhalla on Netflix, which is if people don't know, the first Viking show is just awesome. So watch that. And then there's another one that's called The Last Kingdom, That's also great. And then this one is the third. I don't know if they're in a series. We've watched them all. We love it. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because there's this character. They're all, it's like historical fiction. They're all based on real people, but they make them exist at the same time, which is not historically accurate. But who cares? I live for it. I love it. So it's great. And so one of the protagonists, he's Prince Harold, and he feels it's his destiny to be king of Norway. And he's a Christian Viking. So it's really interesting because in this series there's this edge of what it means to be a Viking culturally, kind of like I think maybe some Muslim or like Jewish or even Latina, like what does it mean to be a part of a culture and maybe not identify like there's something that is really opposite to that culture. So like paganism versus monotheism and Viking, and I think a lot of indigenous cultures were pagan, were polytheistic. It wasn't just one god entity, and the god wasn't masculine. It was many gods, and there was a balance of female and male energies. And then for whatever reason, I'm not an anthropologist or historian. Monotheism came about, and it came about around the same time that lords and ladies and all this agricultural stuff started happening as well. So, anyways, what I want to say is that during this time, edges culturally, but then also he was going through or is going through, we haven't finished the series, so I don't know how it's going to end up, but he's going through this like wrestling of, am I meant to be this thing that I think that I am, this king of Norway, and what am I willing to do to get there? And what does that mean being a Christian Viking for my people, for Norway, understanding that I have a certain reality, I have a certain vision that is obviously going to impact people for better or worse. And what does that mean? Like all these layers. And so I'm just struck by that as we talk about all of this, because I think that, what do I want to say? I wanted to say something along the lines of like, I remember reading something because I don't consider myself very political, or I'm not a student of politics, even though my life has been shaped. I think all of our lives have been shaped by politics one way or another. And I read this article about the moral difference between conservatives and so-called liberal, at least here in the United States. I can't speak for what those things sound or are defined in Central America, Latin America, and Europe. Those things might change, have a different flavor and stuff. But here in United States specifically, because I can't speak for Canada, North America either. So in the United States, there's a two-party system basically. And I read this article that talked about the moral difference between these two distinguishing, well, I don't know, distinguishing, but like two different things, conservatism and liberalism, is this feeling of this sense of like one side feels that like not everything should be okay, but like little government, no government control, because people should have a say and people should have autonomy and be able to do as they feel and whatever, pasteurize the milk, don't pasteurize the milk, vaccine, not vaccines. Like people should be smart enough, should be able to do whatever they want because it should be on the individual. And with that, there's a high level of agency on the individual and not on the collective. The reverse is the reverse. Like the opposite is true for the other group, where the government, the collective, should have more of the power and the say because it's power to the people. If more people have benefits and universal health care and blah, 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 then there's less pressure on the individual, but then there's also less agency on the individual. So individuals have to navigate the overall collective and whatever that means. And so what I took away from that was just this interesting, like, because I have a family member who's very conservative, and so we clash sometimes. I don't consider myself one way or the other. I think with Sarah, I've talked with you that I feel like I'm kind of moderate, leaning towards liberal, but I try to see both sides because I feel like both sides have good sides and bad sides. But what I do struggle with though is that high level of input on the individual, because I do think that and this is my opinion, I've not lived in a liberal democracy, And I've been learning some things about different types of democracies in Europe, and that we have an electoral democracy, which is very different than a social liberal democracy like they have in Norway. So I guess the king of Norway did something right to my eyes. What I want to say with this is, like, as we think about edges, something that I find really problematic is putting so much pressure on the individual, because that assumes that that people have the time, energy, resources. Like we were saying about the capacity. We are not going to have the capacity to figure out this stuff. And even if we did, it's still not, like, nothing is guaranteed that we're going to have the support and be able to push our edges. And not to say that we want things to be guaranteed, but just, I know for me, when I was a contractor for 5 years, not having any health benefits for 5 years, that was a lot of strain on me, making the question of, can I afford the health care I know I need when I cannot afford it? What am I willing to trade? What am I willing to sacrifice? And that could be motherhood, and that could be relationships, time, like all these things. And I do think that when there is so much of edging, pushing our edges, so much of creating the tools, so much of, all of that is in us. I don't think I'm my best role model either. Like, I think I learn in conversation, in community with others. And I think something that's really missing is this, a friend shared with me, it's called re-indigenizing, which is not the same as decolonizing, from what I understand.
I've heard
And you've heard of it too?
that term, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know very much about it. I just know that it's like the rerouting is what I get from it. And I think that's really important, because what I really love about a lot of the indigenous traditions is, like, especially the youth, they shouldn't be put pressure on, because they're kids. And so, they need to learn what a society, what an adult is, before just becoming an adult. Like, you're born and you're an adult. No, you're a baby, and you start little by little. And I think we lose that sense of capacity, of containment, of consciousness, of culture, of community, of care, when so much is put on the individual, because the individual isn't shaped yet, doesn't know itself. So I'm going to stop there, because I felt like I put a lot in, but I just wanted to really raise that, because while I'm very hopeful, and I do my best to be optimistic about the change and the edges that we're all facing collectively and separately, I am concerned that there is so much conservatism coming up in the world, not just in the United States. And there's a reason for that. There's potentially, edges that are coming up because something needs to be resolved and integrated and, healed. But I am a strong proponent of the collective, because we can't do things alone. Like,
Oh my gosh, my ear just started ringing. Like, am I even about to say what I'm about to say? But okay, so as someone who, and this is why identity matters. I actually wrote this down because, like, I wrote the edge of my political party, because that is an edge. Like, all of us should be attuned to. And like, if you're going to toe the party line your whole life, at least try to pay attention. But like, if you know you're just going to vote for one party, at least try to be as aware as possible about what is going on. And sometimes that's not even like what people can do. Sometimes people don't even have capacity to do that, pay attention.
right.
So I feel like it's just being able to have a capacity for political knowledge to any degree is it's just, yeah, with so much edging, how do you, like, knowledge becomes a luxury, education becomes, and I love that that's why you brought up at the beginning, like, college, even though it has a ridiculous price tag. And I do think the rising cost of education is a problem, and the dilution of, like, what it means to connect with students and, like, actually learn and put them in good environments that retain their critical thinking skills. I think that is challenging on an institutional scale. Yes, but putting yourself in those different environments to actually learn what your edge is, and losing your container with too much of that, because that's this chapter, right, of college, is this transformation period of trying new things. Like, that's the point of all of the rooting underground. Like, there's really no form yet. The roots are going in all sorts of different directions, but eventually there's this culmination of a sprout, and one direction is chosen. And I think that's when we get later in our lives, like that's I think the exhaustion of the 30s and questioning parenthood for so many of us is because
Mm.
we are tired of the edge of our capacity to provide for ourselves being
Right.
just like beaten against over and over and over and over. Like there's that. And I do try to remember these other generations because I think of like global war is not new. I just, with the modernity aspect of everything else, it just feels heavier. Maybe because we can see it so intimately now from like tiny computers in our hands that are on us all the time. Like kids are burning out younger and younger, it seems. And so that's the capacity that we are raising this whole podcast of in awareness of, is that there is a capacity issue at hand. And it's this generation, it's happening now. And we are asking our kids and our kids and the next generation, not our to take on an enormous amount of responsibility because AI is it's already distorted our reality. And so going back to the seconds of connection between real human people, I feel like that's going to become the next commodity, if you will. And that's what I thought of originally. That's why I was about to say this was the thing. No, that was not the thing that I was like, am I about to say this? Because this is the thing, and you'll see why. As someone who is, this is why identity is important. That was the beginning of the tangent, because I do identify as a moderate. I think it's important to retain and be allowed to stand in a party. And I choose the moderate party. I choose the middle, but I do lean more conservative. And that's the environment I was raised in. And I still hold a lot of conservative values. And it's like, if we were to open up all of the lists of those things that you mentioned earlier about the value differences, it's like I can see a reason to vote. I voted like more liberal on a more local level because I feel like I like the hyper local, more democratic or more social communitarian aspects of smaller communities. I don't want the federal government to have that sort of power.
Right, right, right.
And so I feel like there's just more nuanced conversation on that front. But as someone who identifies as a capitalist, because I agree with small business, I agree that business owners should be able to control their own pricing to the degree that it actually meets a local market, and they don't have a monopoly over like the bottled water in Katrina, like that horrible example. People charging $50 for a bottle of water. It's like, okay, like, so free market isn't always free. And I still stand by someone who I would say who is a cap. I think I fall into that camp. But I say that to say that I would have never believed, as someone who holds all of these values that I'm visually describing with my right hand, to also simultaneously hold all these values of what communists 100%, like the hill that they'll die on. I'm like, I can also see why I would stand on that hill, like these communitarian values that you were speaking of. That really stirred something in me too, of like, I gotta say, as someone who was raised in an environment who it was really bootstrapped, like really, really, like it did not matter how you felt. That does not matter. And I have to say that to myself to remind myself, like, that is an aspect of myself I can still respect because it has gotten me through hella hard times. And I have I learned to grow through the pain. There's been a lot of pain, physical pain too. And so like to actually be in a place where I'm physically pain free and also like can see my growth looking back, it's like, okay, that's a good aspect if the environment or situation calls for it, and it's not to be used in all parts of my life at all times. So going back to like the edge of knowledge about even your environment or like your political party, how do you identify in this tumultuous time? Oh my gosh, we've seen both parties change a lot in our lifetime since we were kids growing up watching the news. Like, the Democrats did what? And the Republicans did what? Like, we're all getting a little sick of it. And I think maybe that's what this episode is about. It's saying like we've reached our limit. Like we've been pushed to the edge. This is the
Yes,
edge.
yes, yes. I mean, I go back to I mean, I don't know what I want to say, but what came to mind is like yin yang. Like we need both. Like we need a balance. And I don't I this is why I don't like to identify myself as either because I'm like, well, I mean, my dad, I don't know, we don't have all the time, but just to share my family's background, El Salvador gets a lot of bad rep now because the president has taken control of a very tiny country that was in civil war for decades. And I struggled with that because I was born here. And when I was told that the reason why there was civil war and my whole family left El Salvador, left its homeland, is because the United States was playing this kind of both sides. They had put someone that they wanted, similar to, I think, what's happening in Venezuela or in other countries around the world, where if it's not looking like who the US wants, the US will play both sides, and it did, and it's the people that suffer. And it's interesting that the people left illegally, undocumented or not. Both of my parents came both ways. My dad was undocumented, my mom was not, and I'm a product of that literal moment in history. If that had not happened, I would have probably been born in El Salvador. But if my parents had not left because of all the historical dominoes, and my dad left and he went to fight a war in Nicaragua, neighboring country, that is still communist to this day, because my dad was a guerrilla fighter. He had a machete. He was very happy to be communist. He became an accountant under the communist regime, under the Sandinista party. And so I come from that background of very much like, fuck the powers that be, because they will fuck you right back. And so
Yeah. What are we
I
doing here? What else would you call this?
I know exactly. I mean, but I also, I mean, I like it. That's why I lean towards liberal, because I know that people don't have it in them forever. We need support, and I don't know what that support looks like for everybody else, which is why I'm moderate, because I also don't feel comfortable the government coming and saying this is okay for everybody. But is it? Like, give me my freedom, but I need my freedom, but give me support. So I don't know what that looks like, because each state in the United States is like its own mini country, and it has its own spectrum and colors and languages and flavors, which is beautiful, which is why I'm a very proud American, North and Central American. But at the same time, I'm just kind of like, why are people having to choose, like themselves or family or whatever? Like, can we find a balance? And I know Norway and all these happy countries in the world that have kept those records, like they're small, they have a very homogenous culture, and that's not the case here, where, civil rights was literally 50 years ago. So it's not that old, you guys. And so there's a lot of things. So there's a lot of edges. And I don't think that I try to carry this weight all the time on my own. Like, I think having, again, support, and maybe this is what I want to end with, because I know we got to wrap up soon. If you find yourself with all these edges, external edges, realize that it's not your job to solve it. Like, finding the people, the communities, the ways to self-regulate, I don't know, not to put more on you, but so that you're not having to carry all of that. So kind of taking that off and focusing on what you can do for yourself, or if you choose for others, has been a big help. Like, that moment today, that second where I was like, not today, I can't do it today. And I will say, for people like me, calling it out, people of color, first generation, rest is an honor, and being able to take rest, because sometimes, I mean, I don't know how I want to say this, but sometimes I'll say, I'll just do one more email, I'll just do one more thing, and I'm kind of holding my pee, and I'm kind of like, I'll just, no, like, go
Yeah.
pee, go drink
Oh my God.
water.
Yeah.
Rest is needed. You can't do your best when you're not rested. So I will just leave it to you, hand it off to you to close us.
I think that's a beautiful way to end it, by saying, don't hold your pee. And I know that I've left this podcast to go use the bathroom a few times, especially when there are morning episodes. And I'm like, or for morning, like, or for me. And like, there's that, I think it goes back to what we started with, is like honoring what it comes up in the moment, and how you want to meet your environment, and how you want to honor yourself and others. And yeah, feeling sovereign enough to do so. So yeah, edges are important for growth, and we can't, there's a season even for the plant. It's not just like all this metaphor that we were talking about. Like, eventually there's rest for a season. Now it goes back to plants. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Capacity Conversations. Remember to take your rest. That's an episode or a song in the playlist, Find Your Rest. Look it up. The Capacity Conversations playlist on Spotify.
Yes. I didn't know that
Catch you in the
was an
next
episode. See you all. Thank you so much for being here.